What if a grand empire could simply vanish, not crumble into spectacular ruins of stone and marble, but fade away, its legacy swallowed by the very seas it once commanded? This isn't the stuff of legends, but the true story of Srivijaya, a phantom empire of the waves. It was a civilization that defined an entire era of Southeast Asian history, yet remains one of its greatest enigmas, leaving behind not towering monuments, but whispers in the jungle and ghost stories on the tide. The Srivijaya Empire. In the 7th century, the world's most valuable commodities, spices, silks, and precious resins, traveled on ribbons of salt and sea. The global economy of the time was a complex network of trade that linked the powerful empires of China and India. But the heart of this network was a dangerous, chaotic place. For centuries, merchants had navigated the treacherous Malacca and Sunda Straits, a watery bottleneck rife with storms, perilous reefs, and ruthless pirates who preyed on vulnerable ships. It was a journey of immense risk and immense reward, a place where a single successful voyage could make a man's fortune or claim his life. This was the stage where Srivijaya would make its entry. Its strength lay in the sea. This was a new kind of empire, a Thalassocracy, a kingdom whose power was born from and held on the waves. This elusive kingdom's greatest secret wasn't a hidden treasure, but its very nature as a fluid, adaptable force, one that understood the power of controlling not just territory, but the arteries of global commerce itself. The first whispers of this empire weren't found in a castle, but on a stone inscription unearthed in Sumatra, dated to the year 683 AD. Known as the Kedukan Bukit inscription, it tells of a powerful ruler, a king named Dapunta Hyang Sri Jayanasa, who led a great fleet and an army, conquering all who stood in his path. The inscription celebrates a sacred journey of conquest led by Dapunta. It describes a military expedition with 20,000 soldiers and 312 boats, culminating in the establishment of a new, prosperous kingdom. It was a foundational text, proclaiming the king's divine right and the dawn of a new era of Srivijayan supremacy. The name of the kingdom he founded was Srivijaya, which translates to glorious victory. Srivijaya's genius was in its strategy. It understood that control over the Malacca and Sunda Straits was an economic chokehold on global commerce. While other kingdoms fought over land, Srivijaya's rulers saw the real power was in the water. Instead of demanding absolute control, Srivijaya became indispensable. They offered safe passage, protection from pirates, and a place for weary sailors to rest and resupply. In exchange, the trade flowed through their hands, and a steady stream of taxes and tributes poured into the capital. The tolls they collected on goods, which included everything from aromatic resins like benzoin and camphor to rare spices like clove and nutmeg, turned them into masters of the sea lanes. Their immense wealth inspired later historians to dub Srivijaya a land of gold. The capital was located near what is now modern-day Palembang, but don't imagine a traditional city of stone. Imagine a city perched on wooden stilts above the Musi River. Homes, temples, and palace halls rising like a floating forest, all linked by boardwalks and canals. The Srivijayans were a people of the water, and their civilization reflected that. The Maharaja, their ruler, didn't demand absolute fealty from distant lands. He expected tribute and a show of respect. His rule was a mandala, a network of allegiances with local chieftains, all orbiting the central power. It was a clever system of diplomacy and prestige, not brute military force, that held the empire together. The kings of Srivijaya cultivated a reputation for spiritual and military power, becoming the central point around which lesser rulers organized themselves for their own benefit and protection. This was an empire built on influence, not occupation. However, Srivijaya was not alone in the region. Its success and dominance made it a powerful neighbor, and its relationships with other kingdoms were a complex mix of alliance and rivalry. The most significant of these relationships was with the powerful Mataram kingdom on the island of Java. While Srivijaya ruled the waves, Mataram's strength was rooted in its rich agricultural lands and monumental stone architecture, a stark contrast to Srivijaya's fluid wooden capital. This rivalry would become a defining feature of the era, as the two great powers constantly vied for influence and control over the resources and trade routes of Southeast Asia. By the end of the 7th century, Srivijaya had done something remarkable. It had turned one of the most treacherous maritime regions on Earth into a controlled network of ports, way stations, and toll points. The Maharaja's ships patrolled the waters, and his envoys collected tribute not just in gold and spices, but in something far more valuable: prestige. This prestige would soon become a currency of its own, one that could be traded with kings and emperors far beyond Southeast Asia. But Srivijaya was more than a toll collector. The kingdom understood that the flow of ships was also the flow of ideas, and in the 7th to 9th centuries, no idea was more powerful across Asia than Buddhism. At the height of its power, Srivijaya became a magnet for pilgrims, scholars, and translators. Chinese records tell us of monks who made the long and dangerous voyage from the Tang dynasty's ports to Palembang before continuing to the sacred sites of India. The most famous of these was Yijing, a Chinese Buddhist monk who spent 6 months in Srivijaya in the year 671. Yijing wrote that Srivijaya was a great center of Buddhist learning, with over 1,000 monks studying the Mahayana tradition. He advised Chinese pilgrims to spend at least a year there before traveling on to India to refine their knowledge and learn Sanskrit. His writings give us one of the clearest contemporary portraits of the kingdom, a bustling, cosmopolitan port city where the scent of incense mixed with the smell of salt water, where traders from Arabia, India, and China exchanged goods in open-air markets, and where the chants of monks carried over the river at dawn. The Maharaja himself patronized monasteries and maintained close ties with Buddhist centers across Asia. Gold leaf inscriptions and stone carvings found in Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula show that Srivijayan rulers saw themselves not just as kings, but as protectors of the Dharma, holders of the Buddhist cosmic order. Srivijaya's power was never about direct occupation. Instead, it ruled through a Mandala system, a political network of influence. This meant surrounding itself with semi-autonomous tributary states, whose rulers acknowledged the Maharaja's supremacy. These states, from the Malay Peninsula to western Borneo, acted as both buffers and partners. They provided resources, manpower, and safe harbors for Srivijayan fleets. The empire also married diplomacy to spectacle. Envoys from Srivijaya arrived in foreign courts with lavish gifts, ivory carvings, camphor oil, exotic birds, and gold-threaded cloth. In return, they received not just political alliances but spiritual recognition, reinforcing the Maharaja's image as both a worldly ruler and a spiritual king. Trade in Srivijaya's time was not a trickle, it was a tide. Chinese ceramics, Persian glass, Indian textiles, and Arabian frankincense flowed through its harbors. The empire taxed every cargo and controlled critical choke points like the Bangka Strait and the Karamata Strait, ensuring that no major merchant fleet could bypass its reach, earning the kingdom a reputation as the keeper of the world's most exotic luxuries. Yet the empire's dominance was never absolute. The Mataram kingdom on Java, rich in rice and stone monuments, was a constant rival. The Khmer Empire in Cambodia watched the maritime trade with interest. Even Chinese dynasties, while trading with Srivijaya, understood that their dependence on its ports gave the Maharaja dangerous leverage. Piracy remained a constant threat. Srivijaya fought fire with fire, recruiting former raiders into its navy and turning them into loyal enforcers. The empire's control of the seas relied on both the promise of protection and the fear of swift retribution. By presenting itself as a center of Buddhist scholarship, it attracted not only monks, but also political legitimacy. A ruler who could claim the protection of the Buddha had a moral authority that rival kings could not easily challenge. Inscriptions from the 8th and 9th centuries show Srivijaya sending diplomatic missions to the Pala Empire in India, which ruled over the great Buddhist universities like Nalanda. In return, Indian scholars and artisans traveled to Sumatra, enriching its culture. This exchange created a unique blend of Indian, Malay, and Chinese influences, visible in art, architecture, and language. By the 10th century, Srivijaya's influence stretched from Sumatra across the Malay Peninsula and deep into Borneo. Its fleets could project power thousands of kilometers from its capital. Tribute poured in not just from Southeast Asia, but from as far as Sri Lanka. Chinese Song dynasty records list Srivijaya among their most important trading partners. This was Srivijaya at its zenith, a floating empire whose capital was a river city alive with the creak of moored ships. Yet empires built on tides are always at the mercy of changing currents. The next century would bring challenges from both near and far, and Srivijaya would need all its skill to survive them. By the dawn of the 11th century, Srivijaya stood as the unrivaled maritime power of Southeast Asia. Its fleet still controlled the straits, its ports still bustled with traders from every corner of Asia. Envoys from the pagan kingdom and Chinese imperial court still arrived bearing gifts and letters of friendship. but the forces that had carried it to greatness were beginning to shift. New powers were rising. Old rivals were sharpening their ambitions. Regional Malay polities tested their strength against Srivijaya's fleets, while Muslim merchants, newly influential in the Western seas, began reshaping alliances and trade flows that had once been the empire's lifeblood. In 1025, a storm came, not from the monsoon winds, but from across the Bay of Bengal. The Chola Empire of southern India, led by the formidable King Rajendra Chola I, launched a massive naval expedition. The Cholas were masters of both land warfare and seaborne campaigns, and they saw Srivijaya's dominance over the maritime trade routes as both an obstacle and an opportunity. The Chola fleet struck with precision. They attacked key Srivijayan ports along the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra, including the capital region near Palembang. Inscriptions in India boast of the capture of the Srivijayan king, Sanggrama Wijayatunggaman, along with rich treasures. Though the Cholas did not hold territory for long, their assault shattered Srivijaya's aura of invincibility. Trade resumed, but the message was clear. Even the greatest maritime empire could be reached and humbled. After the Chola raids, Srivijaya's Mandala system began to show cracks. Tributary states, sensing weakness, grew bolder in asserting independence. Some shifted allegiance to rising powers in Java, like the Kingdom of Kediri. Others began trading directly with foreign merchants, bypassing Srivijaya's ports. Palembang remained a center of power, but now it competed with other regional hubs. The unity that had held the maritime network together weakened. Control of the straits became a contested prize rather than a guaranteed possession. The 12th century brought increased competition from rival ports. The rise of ports along the Javanese coast and the Malay Peninsula siphoned trade away. Chinese Song Dynasty records show a diversification of trading partners, with goods bypassing Srivijaya entirely. Arab and Indian merchants, once reliant on Srivijayan protection, began sailing directly to other ports. The spread of navigational knowledge reduced the dependency on the empire's way stations. The once central role of Srivijaya in the Maritime Silk Road was gradually diluted. Srivijaya's reputation as a Buddhist learning center also faced challenges. Political instability reduced the ability of rulers to sponsor monasteries at the same scale. Meanwhile, other Buddhist centers in Burma, Thailand, and Cambodia attracted pilgrims and scholars. The Mongol invasions of China in the 13th century disrupted the regional balance of power. Trade patterns shifted yet again. The new Majapahit Empire in Java emerged as a dominant force, claiming influence over much of the archipelago. By the late 13th century, Srivijaya was a shadow of its former self. In 1288, an expedition from the Majapahit-led Singhasari kingdom struck at Palembang. Records suggest Srivijaya's rulers were reduced to vassals. The final centuries saw Srivijaya's name fade from the records of foreign traders. Its once mighty fleets disappeared from the straits. Local Malay kingdoms rose in its place, inheriting parts of its culture but not its empire. Though it vanished as a political power, Srivijaya's influence endured. It had been the first great maritime empire of Southeast Asia, proving that control of the seas could rival the power of land-based kingdoms. It shaped trade networks that would last for centuries. It spread Buddhism across the region and fostered a cosmopolitan culture in its ports. Archaeologists today piece together its story from scattered inscriptions, Chinese chronicles, and the artifacts pulled from riverbeds and mangrove swamps. The wooden palaces have rotted away, but the legacy of a Thalassocracy that once commanded the waves survives in the histories of the region. Its rise and fall offer a lesson repeated throughout history. Dominance over trade is never permanent. The same currents that carry wealth can just as easily carry it away. If you want to uncover more gripping tales of vanished kingdoms and the tides that carried them away, subscribe to Tales Lost in Time.